welcome to the Decorative Den. My name's Charity and I'm so happy you're here today. The Decorative Den is a look inside my craft room where I share all things crafting, planning, and DIY. And for today's video, I have a little craft tutorial for you. I have been totally obsessed with dot painting lately, and so I thought it would be fun to put together a project for Valentine's Day. So this is a beginner level project because I am definitely a beginner, and it requires no specific dot painting tools. I'm actually going to show you how to make tools just from normal pencils. So if you are interested in seeing how I made this dot painted Valentine, then just keep watching. So starting with supplies, the first thing you're going to need are two pieces of cardstock, one black and then one of any color of your choice. I'm going to be using this light pink shade. You're also going to need 4 pencils, 3 unsharpened for our tools and then 1 sharpened for drawing, a ruler, a pair of scissors, double-sided tape or a glue stick, a pencil sharpener, and then a couple different colors of acrylic paint. And so you can use any colors that you would like, but I do suggest having at least one be white. The other thing you're going to need is this freebie template that I have linked below, and I suggest printing this out on cardstock or a more heavy-duty paper since we are going to be using this template to trace out our heart shape. The other thing is when printing, make sure that you have it scaled 100% or printing at actual size, and this will just ensure that the heart is sized correctly for the piece of cardstock that we're going to be using. So all you're going to do is follow that bold black line and cut out the actual heart shape. So I'm just going to set that aside and move on to creating my dot tools. And for this, I'm going to take my 3 unsharpened pencils and sharpen each one down to a different width. So none of these are going to be fully sharpened into a full pencil point, and all of them are going to be sharpened to a different size. So here are the 3 tools that I made. And as you can see, all of them are sharpened to a different point. Now you can make these any size that you would like, but I will share with you the 3 sizes I made. So the first is about 3 to 4 millimeters wide. The next is about 2 to 3 millimeters wide. And then finally, the smallest one is about 1 millimeter wide. So once you have those made, you can set those aside, and we're going to move on to prepping our cardstock. And so for this, you're going to cut your black piece of cardstock down to a 4-inch by 4-inch square. And then with that pre-sharpened pencil for drawing, I'm just going to make a dot at the center of each side of the paper. So making a little notch at the 2-inch mark. And I'm going to do that on all 4 sides of the cardstock. Once that's done, I'm going to take my ruler and connect those dots so that I have one horizontal and one vertical line on my cardstock. And these are going to be guidelines for both our painting and for centering our heart template. So as you can see, the heart template also has some guidelines that cross in the center just like the cardstock. And so all you're going to do is line those up. And then once everything is centered, trace the heart. After that's traced, I'm just going to lay down 2 more guidelines for my painting, and these are both going to be diagonal lines that go from corner to corner and cross in the center of the page. And with that, our paper is prepped and we can move on to painting. So for painting, I find it easiest to add my acrylic paint to each of the caps of the bottles. That way I can very easily see the colors that I'm using, and it's also very easy to dip my dotting tools into each color. Now for this card, I ended up using 4 different shades of pink as well as the white, and I will make sure to list the names of each of the paints that I used below in case you are interested in using these same colors. So before starting my actual painting, I always find it helpful to practice dotting on a scrap piece of paper, and I think it's especially helpful for this painting since we are using homemade tools. So with the white paint, I'm just going to go through and show you the 4 size dots that we'll be using for this painting. The largest is actually going to be made with the eraser end of one of our pencils, and then the other 3, of course, will be made with the 4mm, 3mm, and 1mm sharpened end of the pencils. As you practice using your dotting tools, you'll get a feel for the amount of paint that you need at the end of the tool, as well as the amount of pressure that you need to use to get the dot you want. I find that both of these things can change based on the thickness of the paint I'm using, especially if I'm using different brands of paint for one painting. So moving on to our actual painting, I'm going to start with my largest dotting tool, so the eraser end of one of my pencils, and using the shade Bright Magenta, place 1 dot in the center of my paper. I'm then going to take the smallest dotting tool, so that 1mm pencil, and place a ring of dots around it. And I'm using this light shade Twinkle Pink. And as you can see, I like to place these dots down in a very specific order. So whenever I'm doing a circular or mandala type dot painting, I find it easiest to start by placing my dots on the vertical and horizontal guidelines. And I do that by placing 1 dot down and then spinning my page to place my next dot on the opposite side of the paper. I do that for the vertical line, the horizontal line, and then I move on to each of the diagonal lines. And I find that doing it this way just helps ensure that my dots are as evenly spaced as I can possibly get them. So sticking with that 1mm size, we're going to lay down a ring of dots in the color Strawberry. And this ring is going to be offset from the previous ring of dots we put down. So I'm still going to lay them in that same order, placing a dot and then spinning my paper to place the next dot on the opposite side. But this time they are going to be in between our guidelines. Moving up a size to the 3mm dotting tool, I'm going to dip into that white paint and add my next ring of dots. Again, these are going to be offset from the previous ring that we put down, so this ring is going to be back on the guidelines. And I probably should have mentioned this before, but in between each dotting, I like to re-dip my tool into my paint, and this just helps ensure that each dot I place down is about the same size, since I'm using about the same amount of paint on my tool. So sticking with that same size tool, I'm going in with the color Bright Magenta and placing my next ring of dots. And then I'm going to move up again another size, this time with the 4mm dotting tool, and with the color Pink Blush, place my next ring of dots back on the guidelines. And as you're doing this, try your best to stick with the guidelines, but don't stress out if your dots are not perfectly spaced or evenly placed the way you would like them to be. I've found that as I practice and do more of these paintings, I've gotten better with my spacing, but it is still far from perfect. And I think for this painting in particular, since our final shape is a heart and not a circle, it really is okay if your dots aren't perfectly placed. So after doing a second ring with that same 4mm dotting tool and the color Strawberry, I'm moving on to my largest dotting tool, the eraser end, and in the color Twinkle Pink, laying down my next ring of dots. Then sticking with that same size tool, I'm going to go into the white paint and place my next ring of dots. And as you can see, this first one I put down did smear. So the paint on my tool kind of latched onto my paper, and when I lifted my tool, it did smudge across the page. Now, if anything like this happens to you, do not worry. This is something that can be easily fixed once the paint is dry. So I'm just going to leave that for now and continue on with my painting. So for this next row, I'm going to be dipping back into the strawberry color and using that eraser size tool. But instead of continuing my every other pattern, I'm just going to be filling in whatever available space I have. Now, because this is a heart and not a circle, I'm only able to place 1 dot at the bottom point of the heart and then 3 dots on either side of the top of the heart. I'm then going to move down one size to the 4mm pencil, and with the color bright magenta, place 2 final dots on either side of the top of the heart. Again, this is just to fill in the last available space that I have. And that will do it for the mandala portion of this painting. The next step, I'm going to take my 1mm pencil and I'm going to outline the shape of the heart following that guideline we originally traced. And just like our mandala, do not worry if your dots are not perfectly placed or if they're a little wonky. This really does not need to be perfect. The goal is just to help define the shape of our heart. Now this next step is totally optional since it's really only needed if you have any errors like I do. And so to fix that one dot that's smeared a little, all I'm going to do is take some black paint and a thin paintbrush and paint over the smeared portion of the dot. And again, you're going to want to do this once your painting is fully dry so that way it doesn't smear anymore. And then once I have the excess area covered the way I'd like, I just like to go back in with that same dotting tool and paint and place one final dot to help even up the edges. And there you have it, guys. I feel like you can barely even tell that there was an error at all. So once everything is corrected in the way you like it, the final step is just going in with this 1mm tool and filling in whatever space you have with some small white dots. And unlike my mandala where I re-dipped my tool after each dot, for this I'm actually dipping once and then placing multiple dots down before I dip again. And the reason I'm doing this is because the differing amount of paint on my tool creates different sized dots. This is totally personal preference. I like the variety of sizes, but certainly know that you could re-dip after each dot if you'd like these to be more cohesive and similar in size. But the purpose of these dots really is to just help fill in that extra space and define the shape of our heart. I also think having these small white dots really makes our pink mandala pop. Once I'm done placing my dots, I'm just going to set my painting aside to let it dry. And while it's drying, I'm going to take out my second piece of cardstock, which is 8.5 inches by 11 inches, and make one cut on the 11-inch side so that I get a rectangle that is 8.5 inches long by 4.25 inches wide. And that is so that when I fold it over on itself, I get a square that is 4.25 by 4.25 inches. Then once my painting is dry, I'm going to take an eraser and just go through and clean up my painting by erasing all of my guidelines. After that, I'm going to flip over my painting and add some double-sided tape to the back of it. Now, if you don't have double-sided tape, you also could use just a glue stick or really any type of adhesive you like. I'm then going to take my painting and center it on my pink cardstock. And that's it, guys. You have a beautiful handmade dot painted Valentine to share with someone you care about. I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial and feel inspired to create a dot painting of your own. Certainly if you do, please tag me on Instagram because I would love to see what you've created. In general, please hit the like button if you enjoyed this video so I know, and subscribe if you are interested in other craft tutorials, planning videos, and DIY projects. Again, thank you so much for being here, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye, guys!